Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Miller. I'm a psychiatrist at Clinical Trials of Texas, and today I'm talking about postpartum depression. I'm going to start out with just kind of a personal story. My daughter was born about 10 years ago now. Beautiful little girl, certainly the light of our lives. And within a couple of days of her birth, my wife started getting kind of edgy. And I remember one night really vividly, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and Jude, our daughter, was crying, and my wife walks into the kitchen, and she has tears in her eyes, and we're both kind of fixing the bottle and trying to figure things out because we're brand new at this, we're bad at it still. And she gets super frustrated and throws the bottle, which breaks on the ground. Milk goes everywhere, and she just bursts out in tears and says, I just can't do this. This is just all so much harder than I thought it was going to be. And she just felt so sad about the whole thing. And so I hugged her and I told her it was going to be okay. And she went back to bed. I finished feeding our daughter, and within the next couple of days we just talked about that experience and what that was like for her. And ultimately we decided as a family that this was supposed to be a really happy time. And that there was something going on with her that was making it not as fun for her and not as good for her. And so we went to her OB/GYN and we told her about what was going on. And after some discussion, she started on medication. And within a couple of weeks, she was doing a lot better. She was back to enjoying being a new parent, in as much as you can, in between the feedings and the being up late at night, and how physically tough that can be. But I remember what she said that really struck a chord with me, which was, why would I want to be unhappy right now? Right now is supposed to be this great time, and if I can just take like a pill or do something, then shouldn't I do that? Doesn't that make sense? Luckily, my wife's not burdened with feeling like she disappointed me or disappointed our daughter or our families, or that she'd done something wrong. She was able to see it for what it was. She was experiencing probably the beginnings of postpartum depression, and she didn't want to tolerate it. Ever since that time, postpartum depression's been an interest of mine clinically. You think about those first few days after you've had a child. Maybe it's your first child, maybe it's your fourth child. But it's always tough, and every child is different. Every child has a unique personality from the time they're born. Some of them sleep through the night after just a week, and man, some of them don't sleep through the night for a year. And it can be really, really tough. So let's say your life's been a little bit stressful, and now you're not sleeping at night. And now your husband or your spouse or your significant other has to go back to work, and now you're by yourself. You're not sleeping, and you're not feeling good. And you got this newborn, which is supposed to bring you lots of joy, but man, it is hard. It's just physically difficult. It's emotionally difficult. And everybody around you keeps asking you the same thing, aren't you so happy? And it's unrealistic. We blow it when we do that. I've learned now to ask moms, very first thing off is, are you okay? Because it's hard. But we struggle with it. We struggle with it as a culture. We struggle with it as families. It's supposed to be this exciting, fun time, but there's this thing that sometimes sneaks in and steals some of that joy from us. I'm talking about postpartum depression. It comes in a couple different flavors. Some of you have heard of the idea of baby blues. Baby blues is actually a clinical thing. And it turns out that up to 85% of women across the world suffer from it. It is actually the most common side effect of pregnancy. And we don't think about it that way. We don't think of it as a side effect. Unfortunately, so often I think people still get caught up in the idea that it's a failure on their part somehow, that they're not as happy or as excited as they're supposed to be. But there's all these changes that go on, not to mention the fact that you've got a small infant that you're now caring for constantly. A woman's body goes through a tremendous amount of change in a very short period of time. At the end of pregnancy, all your hormones shift. Your estrogen drops, your progesterone drops. There's a whole bunch of things that are called neurosteroids that are in like overwhelming masses in our brain during pregnancy, and then right at the moment we deliver, they just come crashing down. Some of them we're looking at because they have an effects that are similar to anti-anxiety medicines. And if anybody out there has ever taken an anti-anxiety medicine, they know that if you stop it abruptly, all of a sudden your anxiety goes through the roof, and that's exactly what happens in a woman's body at the moment of pregnancy. So if you combine those factors, if you combine that your body just went through this huge change, maybe you went through a C-section, maybe you're physically damaged in some way right now because you're recovering from a surgery, or you're just tired because maybe your labor took a really long time and it was really hard, but now you've got this big hormonal shift, and now you got to go home and you've got an infant that is entirely dependent on you, who may not decide that they aren't going to sleep when you sleep, and they may decide that they aren't going to eat when you eat, and you've got to work around their schedule. And to make matters maybe a little bit worse, in our culture we say if you don't do that, you're a bad mom. Boy, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Baby blues, super common. 85% of women can have them. Of those women, another smaller percentage of people will experience true postpartum depression. What is postpartum depression? It's just a fancy term for having depression right after you've had a baby. You can start having those depressive symptoms even towards the end of pregnancy, and it doesn't have to happen like the day after pregnancy, though that's not uncommon. Women can start to experience those symptoms several weeks later, a month later. What I see commonly in practice, though, the symptoms do start right after pregnancy, but women don't want to talk about it for all the reasons we've talked about. They think that they're going to get through them, they think that it's just lack of sleep, they think that they're just tired, or and maybe more importantly, they think, if I talk about this, does this mean that there's something wrong with me? Does this mean that I'm not a good mom? And I think that's a real struggle for women. It's a hard thing to swallow and to think about. But of women who experience baby blues, it turns out that about, maybe a little less than a quarter of those will go on to actually experience postpartum depression, which means it's about 15% of all women who have a baby will experience postpartum depression, so it's super common. When you have postpartum depression, you have things like low energy, low motivation. The stuff that you know you're supposed to do is just painfully hard to do. The other thing that I see with postpartum depression is a lot of anxiety, a lot of nervousness. Women will sometimes describe it as kind of a compulsiveness, that there's things that they just have to do, they have to control, and they just can't get those thoughts out of their heads. As a psychiatrist, we call those sometimes negative ruminations, which is that thought that just goes through your head over and over again, and you know that it's not helpful to think about it. You know that it's not helping anything to go over it yet again, but as soon as you get your brain to be quiet, it starts again, and it just crowds out all your other thoughts. And as you can imagine, if you've got that going on and you're trying to talk to your spouse about the same thing over and over again, they might get frustrated with you because they're also maybe suffering with some sleep deprivation. They're also trying to get accustomed to having an infant in the household, and so their frustration tolerance isn't so good, and that can lead to all sorts of problems. So let's say you've had a baby and you're not feeling so great. I think it's normal to think, hey, maybe this is going to go away. Maybe this is going to get better. When the baby starts sleeping, I'm going to feel better. And that might be true. There's nothing wrong with feeling that way. The line I draw in the sand as a psychiatrist is when it starts to impact your ability to do the things you're supposed to do. So if you're supposed to take baby for a checkup and you just can't, you don't have the energy to, you can't imagine going to the pediatrician. Worse yet, maybe you're even worrying that the pediatrician is going to confirm your suspicions that you're doing things wrong. And so you just avoid it. Maybe you have your spouse go, maybe you just don't go at all. Or if in the middle of the night the baby's crying and it is every bit of energy you can muster to get up out of bed and feed the baby, that's not good. It's starting to impact your ability to function and to get things done. And that's the point at which I would encourage anybody to seek some sort of treatment. Right now, there's all sorts of treatments that are out there. There's been a number of things that have been studied. Certainly medications as a psychiatrist is something I specialize in, but there's been a lot of studies showing that therapy is great during this time. There's a variety of types of therapy. It's not just one size fits all. And most psychologists out there can help with it, because it's great at that moment in life to be able to take a step back and share with somebody else your emotional experience of things. There is an awful lot of things that women experience and feel in the postpartum period that we don't commonly think of as being normal, whatever normal is, that turns out it's really normal. It turns out that being sad and having the baby blues, if that happens to 85% of women, that's normal. Normal isn't being happy the entire time or excited the entire time. Normal is actually being moody. If I told you that women, and this sounds terrible, it really does, but it's one of those things I think it's just helpful for women to know where their thoughts can sometimes go. It turns out that 30% of all women in the months and weeks following their pregnancy will actually have fantasies of hurting their child. If you think about something that will really, really distress a woman, I can't imagine anything that will distress her more. Now, does that mean that those women are going to go out and hurt their children? No. It's just a thought. It's a fantasy, a quick image, but women are so bothered by it that they aren't going to tell anybody, and they bottle that up. And to have a therapist or a person out there that you can trust who has the experience to actually hear about those things. Because there's so much of these feelings and thoughts that we just don't talk about. If you go and talk to your friend and say, hey, I was kind of thinking about hurting my child earlier today, you might have somebody who looks at you. But if you tell a therapist that, they're going to say, yeah, something that a lot of women experience, that it's actually not uncommon at all. And then they're going to ask you, did you actually think that you would do it? And the answer for most women is overwhelmingly going to be absolutely not. Why would I ever hurt my child? And there might be some tears involved, and you might feel down and sad, but getting that off your chest and hearing that that's okay to have even that kind of extreme thought, I think is really helpful for women. Other women are going to seek out medications, and there have been studies for years showing that medications really do help. When compared to therapy, medications work just as well. It turns out, interestingly enough, that if you combine therapy with medication, that they work no better than just doing therapy or no better than just doing meds. So some of it's kind of your lifestyle choice. For the person who is really only comfortable with the idea of talking to somebody, it works. If you think, man, that hour a week that I have to go and talk to somebody, or that couple hours a week I'd have to go and talk to somebody, that just feels something. They don't trust the person, they feel like it's too much time, and it's just easier and fits in better in their lives to just take a pill. It works, so that's okay. And again, that line I draw in the sand with people is when those symptoms start to impact your ability to do things. The other thing that I would add to that, especially in postpartum depression, it's not just when it impairs your ability to do things. One of the things our culture does have right is that having a newborn should be fun, and it should be exciting. And there should be moments there where you're filled with just great joy. And the idea that this neurochemical change can steal that from you, why put up with it? I mean, get treatment, do something about it, because it can be a great time. Now, all that said, there are certainly people out there who would say, yeah, but I went through a divorce when I was pregnant. I lost my house when I was pregnant. My parent died when I was pregnant. And it turns out that all those stressors in life are things that can really predispose us to having postpartum depression. One of the other more common things that can predispose us to having postpartum depression is when you've experienced depression of any sort previously. So women who age 19, 20, 15, whatever, have experienced an episode of depression, when they get pregnant, there's a chance that their bodies will respond by, again, having an episode of depression. And that's one of those things that, again, I don't know that all women talk to their OBGYNs about, but moving into the future, the hope is, like other illnesses, like everybody's heard of the torch illnesses, and people get vaccinations and all sorts of things for those, and you get asked a million questions when you're pregnant about all these risk factors. And you get tests, you get chemical tests, you get questionnaires, The hope is that someday with postpartum depression, as part of just the routine pregnancy stuff, your OBGYN is going to give you a questionnaire to answer. They're going to give you a blood test to take. And based on those things, they're going to say, hey, you're at high risk for postpartum depression. And moving into the future, maybe we have a time where then not only are you getting your RhoGAM shot and you're getting your vitamin shot or whatever, that you're going to get a shot that then also makes it so you don't get postpartum depression. Because again, why would you put up with that? It's super common. It's the most common side effect of pregnancy is to have baby blues, and why go through it if you don't have to? If there's some way of treating it, why wouldn't we do that? Some women will say, yeah, but again, I don't want to be treated. That means there's something wrong with me. If I'm getting treated, it means I'm not a good mom. And the argument there would be, maybe it means you're not a good mom if you don't get treated. Because women who suffer with postpartum depression, it turns out that their children just don't do as well. They don't thrive as much. They don't meet their milestones as fast as other kids. And again, if you're having to expend all this energy just to do the basic stuff, it is really hard then to have the energy to do all the extra stuff that makes being a parent fun and being a mom fun, and your baby enjoying being with you. So end all kind of statement that I would make about postpartum depression is if you're worried about it, if you're at a point where you just don't feel like you're functioning as well, and it doesn't matter why. I mean, whether you say, oh, I'm not really sad, I've got this other feeling, or I'm not sad, I'm anxious, or it's not that I'm sad, I'm just really tired. If you have anything that is making it hard for you to be a new mom, ask questions, get help, talk to your doctor about it. Talk to your friend down the street, see what they did, and get help, because there's a lot of help out there and there's a lot of things coming in the future that is going to make this a thing of the past someday. So that's what we're hoping to get to. Again, I'm Dr. Jason Miller. I'm a psychiatrist. I work for Clinical Trials of Texas. Thanks for listening today.